today's tutorial, I'm just going to do a very quick card, coloring with a blue Inktense pencil and an aqua painter. Derwent Inktense pencils are absolutely incredible. I got a big set for Christmas and I'm completely in love. They had a great price on them before Christmas. They're a little bit more expensive now on Amazon, but I'll add a link to where you can get these. But what's unique about these pencils is that they are pigment ink pencils, so they're actually more like paint than watercolor pencils are. But they are water soluble until they dry. So if you work quickly with an aqua painter or a paintbrush, you can use the pigment in the pencils just like you would normally use watercolor. The difference being that since they are a less translucent pigment than watercolor is, you can have the color sit up on top of cardstock like this craft cardstock. I'm using Crumb Cake from Stampin' Up. And the pigment will sit on there and look really saturated and not transparent the way watercolor will. On white cardstock, of course, it's equally striking. But it's very hard with a water-based medium to get this kind of intensity, or as I'm sure they say, Inktensity, with a water-based product on a craft cardstock. So I just adore these pencils. The way that I like to use them is by picking up the pigment with my aqua painter from the tip of the pencil, like I'm doing here. I've learned the hard way that if you do this over your project, because I tend to work kind of fast, so if you're flicking your wet aqua painter over the tip of the pencil over your cardstock, you will get little splatters of pigment on your card, which you can then pretend that you put there on purpose, or you can learn from your mistake and do it a little bit off to the side, like I'm doing here. It takes me a while to learn, but I do eventually. Now, my technique is pretty simple. I just start where I want the darkest shade to be, and I work horizontally back and forth up the image as the ink fades. This is much more effective than moving straight up and down, because you don't want a line of dark pigment vertically normally on an object. You normally want the shadows to be at the bottom and maybe on one side, depending on where your imaginary light source is coming from. What's great about Inktense is after it's dry, it is permanent, like I said, but then you can go back on top of that permanent ink and add a little intensity by just putting some more pigment down. So it layers beautifully. I think you'll really love them. I love the opacity on this dark cardstock. To show off that opacity, what I did was I took my image, which is Vivid Vases from Stampin' Up. I got this for free at Leadership, and I squealed a lot about it because I love it and it's so fun to color. And I stamped that in Whisper White Craft ink on some Crumb Cake cardstock, and then used white embossing powder to emboss it. And more than anything else, that's just to give me a hard edge, kind of to make my coloring job easier, really. It's sort of a lazy coloring method. But you could just as easily stamp this in black, you know, a waterproof black, or even the same ink, Whisper White Craft ink, and then just heat set it before you start coloring. It's completely up to you. I just think this beautiful pigment is shown off so nicely with that crisp white edge. And I'm kind of a minimalist, so that appeals to me. Another thing that's great about the intensity of these pencils is that they last a really long time. Since you're picking up the pigment just a little bit at a time instead of coloring with the pencil, you'll notice that with pencils that are designed for you to color directly on cardstock with, you use quite a bit more of the pigment than you do when you're working with ink tints, kind of tip to tip like I'm doing here. Now I'm going to come back and make my shadows a little bit asymmetrical. I like that because life is asymmetrical. So I'm imagining my imaginary light source at sort of a 45-degree angle to the bottom of these vases. Then I'm using pure water to clean up where I sort of went outside the lines on this one leaf. If the Inktense pencil is still wet, you can erase it completely with water, and that's what I'm doing here. And then I'm going to go over the flowers one more time with a little darker pigment. They're so detailed that you really need some definition. And by that I mean a more intense shade of blue inside the flowers to show off those gorgeous detailed little lines, especially on this freesia or wisteria, I'm not sure which one it is, in the second to last vase. You want an aqua painter with a nice sort of unused tip so that you can get some fine detail in these little sections. But really it's a pretty easy and quick project. I'm sorry for all the shadows, but it's so beautiful outside today that I had to film this outside. And we have this giant tree over our backyard that's blowing around and making these shadows, but it's beautiful out here and I can't resist being outside. Now I'm going to take a paper towel and just get a little bit of water on it from my aqua painter, and I'm going to clean up the embossed lines where I got some blue pigment on them. The freesia was the hardest to be sort of accurate with, so I just want those to look crisp and clean, so you can clean that up with the paper towel. And there's my finished row of vases. Hope you enjoyed it.